Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Is Theresa May serious about curbing executive pay? Who will be crowned Nigel Farage's successor as UKIP leader? And can the Lib Dems pull off a by-election upset in Richmond on Thursday? All questions for the week ahead. So, Tom, on pay, talk about the big companies having to publish the ratio of what the chief executive gets with the average worker in the company, giving shareholders real power to vote down pay rises if they don't like them for executives, which I think is pretty much what Ed Miliband proposed in the general election in 2015. Is she serious about this?
Yeah, she's very serious. And I think, first of all, the Tory party probably does owe Ed Miliband just a small apology for trashing all his ideas in June or May 2015 and then putting them all up for votes in November 2016. She's very serious, and this all comes back to her desperate fear that unless capitalism reforms itself and becomes more acceptable to the just about managing or even 70-80% of the country who's not earning vast wealth anywhere near the sort of figures that you see out of the city, then some very serious things will happen and the political sense of trust will implode. She's already, must be said, been bartered down by her own cabinet on this. She wanted to go a lot further. She wanted to make workers on the board mandatory. I know for a fact that they've managed to stop that. So it will be strong.
What will her
not
fallback position be then on workers on the board if she's not going to be able to get it in red meat and tooth and claw? What would she do?
It would be, we would very much like you to have workers on the board, but whatever they do on that board, they will have no binding voting powers on that board.
When you look at what was leaked out over the weekend, that we should know the ratio of the top to the average, that shareholders who own the company should determine in the end the highest paid salaries, you kind of think, well, what could the possible objection be to any of that?
Well, two things. One, I agree with Tom that she is deadly serious about this agenda, and it sort of comes under the banner that sentence in the party conference speech about it's time to focus on the good that government could do. She is by instinct more of an interventionist than Cameron and Osborne, but is incredibly cautious, whether it's through the internal constraints of opposition within cabinet or her own small c conservative caution at implementing any of this stuff. And part of the problem with this is the practicalities. I remember George Osborne commissioning, do you remember he commissioned Will Hutton to do a report? He came up with some very similar proposals which were never implemented. It's quite hard to enforce. It will antagonise business leaders when she's trying to sort of woo them again in this sort of Brexit furore. So there are problems with it. And my guess is, judging by what's happened so far, is the aim will be genuinely bold and interesting, and the implementation incredibly cautious.
Does it matter if she annoys some business leaders? Isn't that part of her brand, that she's standing up to big business? And
actually, I think
will there be any problems on the Tory backbenches with it?
I think there will be, and I think it does matter actually at this incredibly sensitive time for where we are positioning ourselves as a country and whether we are going to brand ourselves as a great global place to do business. Implementing quite interventionist policies, any suggestion that actually the government can control how much the top earners get, I think will be
But it's not government control, it's the shareholders.
Well, I think...
What would be wrong with the shareholders who own the company determining the pay of the hired hands, which is what executives are?
Morally, you can absolutely make that argument, but I think to business leaders, they just won't like it. And I think that ultimately, this probably won't come down to more than a row of beans. Look, it's rather similar to what happened, a huge debate about whether there should be quotas of women on boards. In the end, that never happened. All that we get is figures, and it doesn't really change anything.
Quotas of women, for which there is a case, and there's a case against two, that would be government mandate. This is not. This is simply empowering shareholders who own the company to determine the pay of the people they hire.
Absolutely a strong moral argument for it, but I nonetheless predict that the Tory backbenchers will not like it.
Also, the downside is this is not a normal world. This is a world where a whole lot of companies are now thinking about upping sticks and moving to Europe. do you really want to
give...
No,
a whole lot of companies say they're doing that. Not one has done it yet.
Indeed. But do you want to...
those that said they would do it turned out to be making massive investments in this country.
But is it not an incentive for these people who are making all these terrible threats to, if you were thinking about cutting their own pay, to actually go and do it? That's the downside.
To go to Europe, where bankers' pay is now mandated by Brussels.
Yeah,
that would really work.
It's a very vivid way of showing you do. You are addressing the issue of inequality.
Exactly. That's her shtick, and that's why I think she'll go with it. But anyway, let's move on to UKIP. Let's see the candidates for UKIP. I think we're going to get the result tomorrow. Can we see the three? There they are. We've got Paul Nuttall, Suzanne Evans in the middle there, and then on my right, John Rhys-Evans. These are the three. One of them will be the next leader. We'll know tomorrow who's going to win.
I think it's widely predicted to be Paul Nuttall, and I think that is probably the outcome that certainly the Labour Party fears the most. Paul Nuttall is a very effective communicator. I think he's not a household name, far from it at the moment, but I think people will begin to learn a bit more about Paul Nuttall and find that he is actually quite a strong leader.
Can he pull UKIP together again after this shambolic period since the referendum?
I think if anyone can, he can, and I think his brand of working collar northern UKIP, or blue collar northern UKIP, is the thing that will work for them. And remember, he's...
Do you think he's a favourite, by the way,
I think he's a favourite. I think it'd be amazing if he doesn't win. The greatest problem he's going to have is getting Nigel Farage off his back, who spent the last 6 months...
he's going on a speaking tour of North America.
But you've got to think...
A long speaking tour.
UKIP won this EU referendum. They had this incredible chance to hoover up all this discontented Labour voters, certainly in the north, and all he's done is associated UKIP with Farage. So Paul Nuttall is starting at a minus, I'd say.
But Nigel wants to get out of it. I mean, Nigel Farage is fed up of UKIP and will be quite glad to be hands off it. I think the bigger problem is money. You know, it doesn't solve that.
If it is Paul Nuttall, we don't know the result yet, but OK, he's the favourite. If it is him, I would suggest that's the result Labour is frightened of most.
Yeah, to be honest, I think they're frightened of UKIP, whatever the result, and possibly with good cause. The reason I qualify is that what you call a shambles over the summer has been something that, you know, it goes beyond Monty Python in its absurdity and madness. And that calls into question whether it can function as a political party when you've had what's gone on this. The number of leaders in itself has been an act of madness. As both the other panellists were saying, in a context which should be fantastic for them. They've won a referendum, there's a debate about what form Brexit should take, it's a dream context, and they've gone bonkers. Now, if he can pull it round, and I agree with all of you that he's a very powerful media communicator, then it's a threat to Labour. But he's got to show that first.
Indeed. The by-election in Richmond in south-west London, called by Zach Goldsmith over Heathrow. Has it turned out to be a by-election about Heathrow, or has it turned into a by-election, which is what the Lib Dems, I think, wanted, about Brexit?
Well, we'll know on Thursday who wins. If the Lib Dems win, then they will have turned it into a referendum. And from what I can hear on the ground, it seems incredibly close now.
Really?
The Lib Dems are swamping Richmond. They had 1,000 activists there yesterday. You know, that's getting on for what, you know, 1/100th the actual population of the place. So I think if you look at it another way, if the Lib Dems don't manage to win on Thursday, they don't manage to turn it into an EU referendum, despite all the efforts they've made, then it will be probably a disaster for the party. And certainly their 48% strategy on getting the remainders.
What do you hear, Isabel?
I hear that absolutely Lib Dems have completely swamped the constituency, but this may actually backfire. I mean, I saw a bit of this myself living in Witney when the Lib Dems also swamped Witney, and people began to get rather fed up of the very aggressive Lib Dem tactics.
They're more political in Richmond.
I understand that Zach Goldsmith is cautiously optimistic that he will pull this one off.
Quick stab at the result?
Well, Tom, I think might have been there or close to it and says it's going to be close. I don't know. But what I do know is that I think we're entering a period when by-elections are acquiring significance again. If the Lib Dems were to make a gain, it would breathe life into that near moribund party like nothing else. And similarly, other by-elections in this shapeless political world we're in at the moment, I think are going to become really significant.
All right, well, we don't know if we're covering it live on Thursday night yet, because we've got to find out the time when they're going to declare.
Oh, really?
Because they're quite late, Richmond, in declaring, but they may have told us. If it's like in the early hours, that's fine. if it's in the middle of breakfast television, they can
That would
forget
be a
it.
long
They can
time.
forget
That would
it.
be a
It was
long
a mere
time
waste
for
of time. I wanted just to show you this bit. Michael Gove was on the Andrew Marr show this morning. Let's just see what he had to say.
In the now notorious comment that I made, I was actually cut off in midstream, as politicians often are, and the point I made is not that all experts are wrong. That's manifestly nonsense. Expert engineers...
cars driven...
Exactly. Expert engineers, expert doctors, expert physicists. But there is a subclass of experts, particularly economists, pollsters, social scientists, who really do have to reflect on some of the mistakes that they've made. And the recession, which was predicted that we would have if we voted to leave...
By now.
Yes, has gone like a puff of smoke.
So experts, economic experts, as he talks about there. I mean, the Chancellor's based all of his forward projections in this autumn statement on the economic expert forecasters, to which even Mr. Choate at the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, has says it's 50-50 whether we're right, which is actually the toss of a coin.
Absolutely, but what on earth was he supposed to do? You know, you could have to ideally have a budget that had several sets of scenarios, and
Band
that's
charts.
basically impossible. So crystal
No,
ball,
it was. It's-
crystal ball territory.
But you do wonder if governments are right to do so much of their fiscal projections on the basis of forecasts, which invariably turn out to be wrong.
Well, they've got nothing else to go on. The Treasury forecast used to be wrong. No doubt the OBR forecast will prove not to be exact. But as you say, Robert Choate admitted they are kind of navigating through fog at the moment. But he also added it was fog caused by Brexit. So Brexit, even if you accept these forecasts might be wrong, is causing such a level of uncertainty that no
But
one
he
knows frankly
calculated
what's
it. He
going
put
on.
the figure at 60 billion.
He had to. He
But
had
that
to.
could come to haunt him. He doesn't know.
He hasn't got a clue, but the thing is, but he admitted it.
No,
This is
nobody
the crucial
has.
thing. But
Yeah.
you know, good on Robert Choate. He actually said, "Look, I've got to do. The Parliament mandates me to come up with something,
Yes.
so I'm going to give you a number because you." But you know, I wouldn't trust it if I were you. Is what he basically said. I agree with you. The man who borrowed 122 billion pounds more off the back of a coin toss was Philip Hammond. Now, it does beg the question: what does that say about the confidence Philip Hammond has in his own government's renegotiation? Not a huge amount, I'd suggest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was what was very interesting about the Philip Hammond statement. He quoted the OBR figures. He basically said, look, this is uncertain and this looks bad, and on we go with it. I mean, it's a very interesting situation he's in. I mean, he was a Remainer, and he works in a department which I think regards it as a disaster, whatever
Okay.
everyone else thinks.
Right. I've just been told we are covering the by-election. on this
Hooray.
one.
Oh, right.
Whoopee! How could you miss it? We're part of the Constitution.